Hello again. Today I'd like to share a story from when I was a chess beginner. I learned chess when I was in high school as a freshman, and I remember one of the early pieces of advice given to me by the faculty advisor for the chess team was that I should memorize the chessboard. And when he told me this, I didn't really know what he meant initially. And so I asked him, "What do you mean? Why should I memorize a chessboard? How does one do that?" Because on the surface, the chessboard seems like it's an obvious kind of construct. It has this convenient grid. So what more is there to memorize? And he explained that the chess thinking process occurs entirely within your mind. And so it's important to have an internal mental image of the board. He didn't explain it exactly in those words, but that's basically what he meant. And he explained that I should know what color any square is without looking at a chessboard. And so that was the first step that I took in committing the chessboard to memory and constructing an internal um, idea of what the chessboard really is and how I should use it in my mental exercises. So um, the first thing that I tried was just knowing what color the squares are. And so I started playing this memorization game. I would name a square, and I'm putting this in Notepad so you guys can see. And since it only goes A to H and 1 to 8, it's pretty easy. You can name any square, right? You could name a square like E4, or you could even make a list of a set of squares. So we could say like B6, H7, D1, um, maybe C3, G. You could even do this for squares that don't exist if you want to really push yourself, maybe G2. I'm trying to think of a couple other more diverse squares. Maybe A5 and let me think, F8, okay? So I have a list. Let me just adjust this list so you guys can see it a little better. All right, I'm not doing this very well. Bear with me. All right, so I've got a list. I thought it would really fit on this. So with my list, I'm ready to begin this memorization game. And you can do this kind of ad infinitum as long as you want, and you don't have to pick particular squares. The goal is to eventually know what color every square is by heart. So you should just keep playing this game continually. And you can do it either um, sitting at home, or you could do it in your head, because all you have to do is write down these things. You write down the square, and you write down what color you think it is. So I think that E4 is a white square. So that's what I'm going to write. E4 is a white square. And then B6, I'll write down what color I think that is. So I'll say it's well, I should say light and dark. I think that's the most precise way. And I think B6 is dark. And I think H7 is light. And I think that D1 is light as well. So hopefully you guys are catching on by now that what I'm doing is I'm guessing what color the square is based on my internal memory of the board. And then later on I will cross-reference it with the actual board. So let's see, for G2 I think that's light. For A5 I think that's dark. For F8 I think that's dark as well. And for C3 I think that's a dark square too. So I've already done this a lot, so I probably got all of them right. But initially you might get all of them wrong, or you might get 50% of them right if you're on par with your expectation. There's only two results, and if you guess about 50-50, probably you'll get about half right. But the goal is to get them 100% correct, because when you can correctly and quickly name the color of any square on the chessboard, it means that you've developed a better image of what the board is like. And so you might want to do a game like this where you score yourself. You could also play against a friend or something. So the way I would do it with another person is I'd have them name the squares for me. The reason I would do that is to avoid any kind of bias where I name squares that I already am familiar with. For example, if I like to play the fried liver attack, I might name G5 over and over again because I always put a piece on G5, or F7 because I always sacrifice a piece on F7. So if you have your friend name squares for you, you're more likely to get thrown off a little bit, which helps with the memorization process. And so you can do the same thing for them. And at the end, you compare and you'll count up how many you got right and how many you got wrong. And you can score yourself based on that. But this brings me to the next point. Why do you want to do this in the first place? Why don't you just think it over every time during the game? Well, that's extra work. And the reason you don't want to do extra work during the game is you want to be able to focus on whether your moves that you're thinking about are good or not. You don't want to be focusing on the part where you actually just imagine the move that's being played. That part should come naturally to you. It should just flow naturally from your mind. There shouldn't be any extra effort involved in just knowing what it is that you're thinking about. Whether what you're thinking about is good or not is much more important, and it should take your full energy during the chess game. Now, there's another step that you can take to this. So I'm going to just make those go away. The next step, after you can name the color of any square very reliably, is to start calculating maneuvers. By the way, I just thought of something. So a lot of people, they tell me that they figure out what color a square is by counting from a square that they know. They pick a baseline. This might be helpful for you guys, but I personally don't like this method. For example, someone might remember white on right. Okay, so that means that h1 is white. So knowing that h1 is light, this implies that g1 is dark. H2 is dark, f3 is light, and so you can figure it out from there. And based on whether or not the letter and the number is odd or even, you can also tell if a square is light or dark. I guess the pattern is like this. So letters A, C, E, and G are odd letters, right? So if we're going from left to right, then A is like 1, C is like 3, E is like 5, G is like 7, all right? So they're odd letters. And obviously the numbers 1, 3, 5, 7 are odd numbers. So there's this pattern where if letter and number are, hold on, if the letter and the number are both, let's see, both odd, the square is dark, and vice versa. If the letter and number are not both odd, then the square is light. So that's one way that you can remember. But if you think about it in those terms, I find that people usually end up being like pretty rigid and slow in terms of how they figure out the color of the square. It's better to just familiarize yourself in this kind of guess and check method. It's much faster to learn, and it's much faster to reproduce the results. So I don't recommend using this scheme, although it is kind of interesting to think about why it is that there's this convenient formula for telling the color of a square. Anyway, so don't totally recommend it. I think that you guys should use this guess and check method, and you just do this over and over again to memorize what color they are. But anyway, back to the maneuvering part. There's an extra step you can add to the game where first you name a square and you say what color it is. So you name a square and its color, and then the next thing you do is name a chess piece. All right, so you'll say pawn, knight, bishop, rook, queen, or king. Okay, if you want to be really crazy, you can name chess pieces that don't exist, but that's if I guess if you've already memorized everything and you're like getting bored and just want to play with the chessboard for some reason. So you name a piece and a square. So then the next thing you do is you name all the squares the piece can reach in one move from that square. The reason that this is a good idea is when you're imagining a variation in chess, first off, that work is going on in your mind. Hopefully, you're not the kind of person who talks to themselves during the game, vocalizes all of their variations, which is not good for you or your standing in society, because your opponent will know everything you're thinking, and it's also rude and weird. So hopefully you don't do that, and hopefully you also don't like point and do all this. Like I go there, he goes there. I go here, he goes there, and all that weird stuff. So hopefully you don't do any of that. So provided that you do things in a normal, good way, then all of this calculation goes on in your mind. So as you go deeper in the variations, it's more likely that you're going to make a mistake. So it helps to be able to visualize the maneuvers as easily as you visualize the squares. So if you repeat this process with the maneuvers, for example, maybe I'll pick a square and a piece right now. If you do this process a lot, hopefully it won't be hard for you to imagine um, anything that's going on in the variations that you're calculating. And you can do this in a competitive way with a friend, just like what I described before. So let's pick a square. The square is, how about one that I didn't mention already? How about A7? I think I didn't mention A7. So from the square A7, I'm going to use the piece. Maybe I'll use the queen just for diversity's sake. You know, it can move in lots of ways, so that might be cool. And so the places it can go from A7, I would start naming them now. So I would say queen A8, queen A6, queen A5, queen A4, queen A3, queen A2, queen A1, and then I finish the A file. That's great. I can't go to queen A7 because I'm already there. Then I would probably go along the 7th rank. So I'd say queen B7, queen C7, queen D7, queen E7, queen F7, queen G7, queen H7. And it doesn't go any further than that because that's the end of the chessboard. And then if I want to keep going with the diagonal moves, which a lot of people find much more difficult than the horizontal and vertical moves for some reason, I would say queen b6, queen c5, queen d4, queen e3, queen f2, and queen g1. So after I've done all this, I would go back to a real chessboard and I would compare what answers I wrote with what's actually on the board. And if I get them wrong, I would think that over and just be mindful of what mistakes I made and try to identify some patterns and correct those mistakes. And if you use this method over and over again, and you even maybe give yourself a timer so that you can, push yourself a little bit more, then I think that definitely your board visualization will improve, and because of that, your calculation will also improve. Anyway, that was my story and my advice and the game that I'd like you guys to play to improve your calculation and board vision and reduce the amount of work that you do during a real game. So if you like this, please subscribe, and otherwise I'll see you all later.